Most of the time, we're not lacking options. We're mainly lacking a way to examine them without getting overwhelmed. We often get stuck because a decision isn't clearly defined, or we don't know how to compare options in a more even or measured way. We often don't check alignment with our actual priorities. Probably the biggest thing that we don't do is we don't reflect. So we don't build that wisdom. We don't take those insights forward with us. We don't make the same decision again. Welcome to Everyday Innovation, your go-to podcast for enhancing your creative and entrepreneurial process. I'm Jordan DeVeccia, a multi-passionate creator entrepreneur, venture studio co-founder, and business designer and advisor. Here we live at the intersection of creativity, strategy, and personal development. Join me for inspiring conversations, actionable practices, and insight infusions designed to shift your mindset and empower you with tools and resources to create impactful ventures. Get ready to take your ideas to the next level and innovate with purpose. Welcome back to Everyday Innovation. So if you've been following the last couple of episodes, you know we've been setting the stage for this one. So in episode 1 of this series, so that'd be, I think, episode 31, we talked about tools and frameworks, practical ways essentially to cut through the noise when you're stuck and can't see the next step in a decision. In episode 2 of the series, or episode 32, we looked at identity, intuition, and values, how the internal side of decision-making shapes what feels aligned once you act. So today we're kind of bringing those layers together and creating our own decision operating system, or what I would call DecisionOS. So it's really your unique process of making a decision and putting some structure behind your decision making. So what it'll do is it'll give you a clean, consistent method for evaluating decisions that matter. So why did I even think about this or want to build or talk about creating your own decision OS? Most of the time, we're not lacking options. We're mainly lacking a way to examine them without getting overwhelmed. We often get stuck because a decision isn't clearly defined, or we don't know how to compare options in a more even or measured way. We often don't check alignment with our actual priorities, short term, long term, whatever that might be. I think probably the biggest thing that we don't do is we don't reflect. So we don't build that wisdom. We don't take those insights forward with us. We don't make the same type of decision again. I have mentioned this before, but the quality of a decision is not in the outcome of it, because there's only so much that you can do to influence how something will go or whether a decision is correct, right? The truth of the matter is what may or may not need improvement is the process itself. Really, a lot of people feel that they're bad with decisions. They either underthink or they overthink. So underthinking being more so just running with the gut, but not necessarily tuning into what the gut is saying, if it's coming from a place of emotion or a place of maybe avoidance of having to look at all of the factors, to favor moving quickly, which of course can be beneficial at certain times, but also can be a bit riskier. And then overthinking, of course, when you kind of get into analysis paralysis with all of these different options. Really, a decision OS gives you a place to capture your thinking. It gives you a simple path through uncertainty. It's a rhythm that you can learn over time, and it turns your decisions into small experiments, not pass or fail identity tests. And you really only need to use this when the decision touches things like your time, money, relationships, reputation, maybe your direction, your energy, or if it just feels like it matters to you. There are some smaller decisions, of course, that compound over time. What you choose to eat, or if you choose to work out, things like that, that of course are super important over time. So maybe it's using it in the decision to take on a new habit, but you don't need to use it every time you want to decide what to eat. You can obviously use more of a gut check on that, or have something already pre-decided so you can limit your decision fatigue, of course. And you can trust your gut and take action quickly. I don't want to discount that. I know I had mentioned that earlier, but you can do that and still be someone who benefits from having a way to check your own patterns. The A decision OS really isn't competing with your intuition. It's kind of more honoring it by backing it up with data and also seeing where you could listen to it more. And it's also not competing with action. So it's not meant to keep you in overthinking. It's helping you act more so from clarity instead of urgency. So think about how you would track meals, right? When you're new to learning about macronutrients or losing weight, right? Tracking workouts because you're trying to see how much weight you should go up on a certain machine that you're using at the gym, making sure that you're hitting all parts of your body during a workout if it's a full body workout. The way that you might track time if you are, at work or you are neurodivergent, ADHD, and you have a bit of time blindness and you're starting to learn how to track your time properly and estimate your time properly, you may be tracking it more often than you would at other points, right? And then with money, of course, if you are wanting to be on a budget or you're trying to have a better understanding of your financial landscape, you're going to be in a season of tracking your money more going in and out, right? You don't have to track any of these things forever. And a lot of times, there will be seasons in which you want to track something more or less. We all do it, right? So you want to track these things because it gives you data so that you can learn more about yourself and learn more about the context that you're in right now. And this decision OS or this decision process works the same way. It's not meant to be a tool of overanalyzing. It's really meant to be there, kind of like training wheels, so that you can start to look at a lot of data from decisions, see what things resonate or don't resonate or helpful or not helpful, and then use it on decisions of certain types over time. Maybe collaborative decisions are ones that you might want to use it for, just larger decisions that touch a lot of areas of your life. Or maybe you want to use it even on some smaller decisions as well, just to kind of give yourself a little bit of extra feedback. There's no wrong way to use it. It's just a structure that's there that helps you avoid, like I said, the underthinking of where you're just going for something. But even just the tracking of that helps you gain insights from that decision. And avoid the overthinking too, because the overthinking takes up so much time when you don't have a structure behind it and you keep mulling it over in your head. When you have a structure, you can consider it for the moment and then move on. So the value of this really isn't so much in the steps. It's really kind of the more so the insights that you're building over time and the cadence and the design that you bring to your own process so that you have confidence in your decision making as well as when you make decisions with others. You can explain your justification and also your way of coming to that conclusion in a more cohesive manner than just solely a gut check, right? Or overthinking, like I said, where you're mulling it over and over and you've thought a lot about it, but there's not really a structure behind how you came to that decision. So I always use these 5 phases. I've now called it the Everyday Innovation Model just because I was using it for venture design, and I've noticed that this is an innovation process and innovation stages that happen in a lot of different areas of life. So I call it Everyday Innovation Model because it really does show up in micro, macro types of decisions or builds or creative projects, whatever it might be. So there are 5 phases. If you want to get more into the venture design side of it, I think it's episode 27. You can learn more about how it applies to venture design, and I've mentioned it in a few episodes. But the 5 phases are clarify, architect, validate, activate, and integrate. You've probably experienced all these steps before informally in any sort of decision that you've made before, any sort of creative process. But I'm going to break them down for you, and we're going to talk about them today. And this can be a point of reference that you can journal from. So think of this as something that you could log in whatever format you'd like, whether it's a journal, your notes app. I have a template that's at the end that I will share more about. So just up top, I want to let you know that there is a solution to make this a bit easier or that you don't have to remember. But even if you just want to take a note now, or you want to look at the show notes later and just do it on your own in a journal, that's great too. But I do have something in Notion to offer at the end if you'd like to use it. So let's go through these one by one, and we'll walk through this kind of full process using one general type of example so you can see how the phases work in real life. So something that probably we've all considered at some point is, should I take this opportunity now or protect my time for my current project, right? So that's a very generalized statement, but it is, do I want to take on more or protect my time, right? So in the clarify stage, this is where you want to define the decision and the context clearly. So a lot of people get stuck here the most. When the decision isn't clearly defined, everything feels a lot more chaotic and a lot heavier than it should be. The clarifying stage is for structuring the question so you're no longer dealing with a vague stress or a vague choices, right? You're dealing with a real decision. So the questions you could ask yourself are, what exactly am I deciding? Like in one sentence. Why am I deciding this now? What's at stake? So time, money, energy, direction, identity. What values apply here? Is this reversible or directional? So reversible meaning, is it something that can be easily reversed, or what's at stake if you reverse it, right? Is this a shared decision, a personal decision, a business decision, whatever that might be? So kind of understanding where it fits in your life and your context. So an example is, I'm deciding whether to take this opportunity now or wait until next quarter. The stakes are really high for my time, my energy, and the momentum of my current agency work. It's reversible, but it's meaningful. So in this case, you would be deciding whether to take this new opportunity now or continue with your current work, which is already kind of demanding. So things that you could log here are, what is a decision question? So I like framing decisions as a question. Move to New York City for a new job is a decision in and of itself. But should I move to New York City for a new job? Okay, then that can open you up to what are the options, right? Understanding why it matters now, just to give yourself a bit of context of, you know, is it money, that is it something that is a factor as well? So time and money often will conflict with each other, right? And this might take on more time, but the money that it brings in, right, it would be significant, something like that. And also why it matters now, is there like a time constraint on it? The stakes, like I said, is there time, money involved? Are there other people involved in this? Your values. So again, in this kind of more open section, so I would say like this would be like just some notes you're taking on it, not a defined piece of data. It's more for your contextual understanding. What values is this touching? Like you can even just think through this too. Are you somebody that wants to protect your focus, and maybe that would dissuade you from taking on more, right? Or is one of your values like opening yourself up to new opportunities, even if though it's uncomfortable or scary? Things like that can make a big impact in even just the framing of a decision. Again, the decision type, you just better understand, is it shared, is it personal, is it a business decision? And then I also like having a little short gut note, again, not in the main data, but just to yourself. What's like your first reaction? Is it curious, hesitant, maybe you're pulled towards something? And what clarifying does is it reduces the reactivity and prevents you from trying to solve the wrong problem. So sometimes when we're trying to make a decision, we have a lot of questions in our head, but really there's one main thing that you're trying to solve. So let's go to the next phase, which is architect. So you want to lay out the options, the criteria. So this is where you stop thinking in binaries. So not just yes or no. Most decisions have multiple viable paths, not just a yes or a no. So the architect part of the decision-making process is identifying the actual choices that are on the table and defining how you'll compare them. So the questions maybe to ask are, what are the real options? 3 to 6. You can do as many as you want. You can think through this as an exercise. What criteria matter most today? What trade-offs does each option involve? What assumptions am I making that I haven't really tested? Is there a smaller or limited version of this decision? So example options that you could consider are, say yes, maybe in this decision of taking on another project, say yes with a limited scope, so a smaller project. Say yes with certain types of maybe time boundaries, right? Like, so you're working on it only at night. Say no, but revisit later. You could do like a miniature test of it, or a trial, for example, or you could delay it intentionally for a certain amount of weeks. There's so many different ways that you can frame this. So architecting the decision makes it easier to evaluate and reduces the emotional charge. So you don't have to go overboard on this. Like in the actual DecisionOS, these are things, again, you can sort of log in the open notes section. I'm just giving them to you here because sometimes you need a little bit more expansion in how you want to think through your different options for a decision. DecisionOS is really focused more on, I would say, the analysis piece of a decision and validating some things. But I think having as much context as possible, which is what you get from, pre-decision and in Clarify and Architect, putting as much as in your notes as possible about a lot of these things will help give you a lot of clarity in the next few steps. So the next one is validate. So you want to check alignment using some objective signals. So this is where you can replace emotional guessing with a simple, consistent check. So the 4 signals, these are in DecisionOS, the template. You could check the show notes on how to get that, but you can also score these yourself. Are alignment. So does this match my direction and values? Intuition. What does my body say when I imagine doing this? Regret. If this goes badly, how much would I regret trying? And risk fit. Can I absorb the downside in this season? These are on a score of 0 to 100. So example scores, you don't have to get super, super granular with it. And these can also change during the decision process. So you may feel a way when you first kind of look at it, and then maybe some more information comes in and you might change those a little bit. And you want to, when you're looking at these signals, right? I would put these, like if I'm logging it, I would log it against the top decision that you're thinking of going with. Okay. So let's say, in this same example, you're deciding whether to take this project or not. And your thought on it is yes, but with a limited scope. So it's one of the options. It's not exactly yes or no. It's yes with a limited scope. And you're feeling in your alignment, in your intuition, the regret or risk fit, you're matching it against your top contender choice, right? If you really are truly having trouble deciding between things and there's not a leader in it, you can consider a couple of choices, but I like to go with even like the slightest leading one, just because it'll help you focus on how confident you are in making that decision. And at least you're making decision number 1 of almost kind of, I don't want to say ranking it, but like keeping an outcome in your mind, right? Instead of considering yes, no, all these ones and trying to score them, it's really, you could kind of do it for yourself, but I would just say go with the one that you feel like is leading, even if it's just by a little bit, and see how you feel into it. And maybe you might reconsider for something else based on new information, but in that moment, scoring it based on your top choice is going to be the move that you want to do. So the interpretation of some of these scores, so let's say for alignment is, let's say 78, whatever. It means that you're aligned with your values, okay? Intuition is at 60. So there's some hesitation, but it's not enough to stop or to, like, you feel comfortable enough, but like it's not like your intuition screaming at you that this is the right choice. Regret is high regret if you don't do it. So you're going to feel really awful or feel a lot of regret if you don't do it and it works out, or it's an opportunity that really opened a lot of doors. And risk fit is 72, meaning that the downside of that is manageable. So if you have a low risk fit, basically you're putting so much risk into it that it's like, it's a very risky, basically the lower the score is, the riskier of a decision it is. So it's risk fit. So whatever it is, it matches your tolerance of risk. So whatever the downside is of this would be manageable if it's in the 70s. So you would log these scores in there. And if you can explain why in the notes, or you could just feel that out. And then maybe one mitigation for the biggest risks. Any tests or tools that maybe you've run to consider things. So this is a great section, and there's a spot in DecisionOS to log tools or frameworks. And there's some already pre-populated there, like leveraging the 60-60-60 rule, or some of it is already built into here, like the regret minimization framework is already kind of built into this model. But there's other things that you can try out or add your own. And this is where you could log like what tools maybe that you use to help validate this decision. So this part of the process prevents a lot of snap decisions, and it helps prevent spirals because it brings your decision into the present, and it's not an imagined worst case or best case scenario. You're kind of testing it as is, using some tools, and also just scoring it in your own way in things that have a lot of signal for the decision making process in general. So it can give you a bit more confidence on how you want to move forward. And then also, you can look at these scores, and if you're seeing that alignment is low, or the regret is super super high or super low, or the risk fit is scoring so low that you feel like you can't take it, all these things will kind of come together. And I have in the actual OS how you want to interpret them. That's really going to be more up to you, like how the scores operate. But I would say if you have fairly high scores on all of them, you need to move, because that's like the higher the scores on each of these, the more likely this decision is going to be impactful in a positive way. Because if you think about it, alignment, high alignment means it's in alignment with the goals and the life you want to build. Intuition, it's lining up with what your gut, however you interpret intuition, the pattern recognition, whatever it might be, is patterning at that moment. The regret, if you had a high regret for not doing it, then that's a huge factor in making sure that future you is happy with the decision that you're making. And the risk fit, if it's something that you feel comfortable with, it's not too uncomfy for you, then of course that's something that you want to move with as well, because it's just not going to be upending as other decisions, right? After that, you move into the activate phase. So we want to make the decision operational. So this phase takes that clarity that you might have gotten in the validate stage into movement, which is where more of the relief happens. So when you go into the activation phase, it's not considering big steps. You want to take one concrete next action that puts the decision in motion. So some questions you can ask yourself are, what is the first step that I can take on this in the next 1 to 3 days? Who needs to know? What needs to be communicated? What boundary needs to be clarified? What is the timeline? So maybe the decision is to soft launch something privately. And the next step would be reach out to 5 warm leads within 72 hours. The communication is maybe tell your partner or team so the schedules align, and the boundary is making sure to define the scope as lessened in writing before saying yes. What you can log here is sort of the final decision, what the first action is, the deadline, who needs to know, and maybe like a timestamp on that. So activation shifts your decision from thought to reality, and that shift reduces stress significantly. So once you kind of you've considered the decision, then you can make the decision in a sense of what's that first step to putting this into motion. Now you're in the phase of impact, right? And now you get to get the feedback on that decision, right? So integrate is the last phase, which is capture what you've learned. This is the phase that most people skip, but it's the one that creates the most growth. So integration is meant to be short and practical. And this is where I think DecisionOS is really, really helpful in no matter how you log it, what you add to it, having the insight after allows you to create data that could be leveraged in the future for better decision making and to learn more about your process. So, questions to ask yourself are, what happened, what worked, what didn't, what surprised me, how does this teach me about how I make decisions, and what should future me remember next time? So, an example could be that in this decision-making process, my initial hesitation was fear, not misalignment. The taking on this extra opportunity was in alignment with my values, but I did underestimate the energy cost of context switching between these two types of projects. So what I would do next time is, because people seem to care a lot more about the clarity on what was coming from my side, I'm going to set some better boundaries of when I'm going to work and um, how I'm going to detail the scope of the project so that I can keep taking these types of opportunities, but not at the expense of my energy and my other projects. Even though it was a good thing to take it, and I was a little worried about it might take some energy away from my other work, it was less about the work itself and more about the communication about when I was working on one versus another. So you can log, the outcome, what worked, what didn't, maybe some adjustments for next time, any recurring patterns you're seeing. So this is where you can note if your intuition's improving, self-awareness is improving, and your decision making becomes faster over time. Or maybe you notice other trends like people pleasing or communication issues, and that's stuff that you can again log in more of those open sections. So another example that uses all 5 phases, just to run down, would be, let's say the decision is to run a small beta of this new app with 50 users. Okay, so to clarify, the problem is we all want feedback. The time and reputation are the stakes of this project. And this is reversible, and it's a shared decision. So it's reversible. We can take it off or end it very easily. And it's a shared decision because I have a team. The architect part of this decision is the options are not doing a beta, having a small beta, or doing a larger launch, but like a pre-launch, still a beta feel, but a bit bigger, right? So in validating it, I'm scoring this at an alignment of 75 with my values. My intuition is feeling pretty good about this, so I'm going to rate that an 80. The regret is at 70, so I think there'd be a big regret if we didn't test it like this with people out in the wild. And the risk fit is 75, so feeling pretty good that running this beta is not going to have a downside that we can't handle. So that's good enough to test, right? So I think to activate, we're going to reach out to 10 partners this week as a first so that we can start moving toward the larger beta. But let's start with 10 people just to get in their hands and start documenting. And to integrate, what we learned was, and we realized that even though we reached out to 10 people, they might not have been the right people to start with at first, but that was still the right action and the right process of going about doing the beta test. We just maybe missed a piece of how we were going to go after that first group. And now we can take that information, and out of the people that we've continued to reach out to in the future, if we do this again or we double down on our marketing, we can take the information from the best candidates that we ended up finding a bit later and feeding that back into the process. So let's talk about what DecisionOS, the template at. So you'll see in your show notes that there will be a link, and there's also going to be an option to rate the podcast and get it for free, which I highly recommend. If you can rate on Apple Podcasts and write a review, that's so, so helpful. And I would love to just give this to you as well. So please look out for that. Why the template? Basically, you can run this operating system in a notebook or notes app. As you were listening to this, I'm sure there were pieces where you might want to take notes, or there's going to be things on the blog. Like there may be some in the show notes here, but mainly on everydayinnovation.io. You'll see in the newsletter/blog, there's going to be more detail on all of this. But in the actual template itself, it is actionable, and it includes phase guides. So some prompts for each stage, so you're never staring at a blank page. So when you're categorizing them in each stage, or you have a few decisions, one's at one stage, one versus another, you kind of can have a reference there of what stage it's in and how to get into it or kind of exit it. a decision log so you can track decisions in one place and filter them by different types of things like the phase or dates, things like that, and have a little calendar there as well. The decision types and tags so you can spot patterns. So if you have tags on there, there will be some suggested ones, but you can also add your own as well. You can spot patterns. Like I always underestimate financial decisions, right? Tools index. So there's frameworks like the pre-mortem, 2x2, weighted matrix that are already in there with some descriptions and the ability to add your own as well. And then there's going to be also a resource library where there are some deeper reading and examples when you want to go further. So the perfect thing, as well as if you're adding it, is maybe you heard something on a podcast and you want to add that resource to your resource library. And maybe there's a tool in it too. You can add that to the tool library as well. And then there's a couple of sample decisions in there. They're pretty light, but just to fill them in for you. And there's a blank decision that you can duplicate and fill out for yourself. It's flexible. Just start simple, and then you can customize as you learn what works for you. The power really is not so much in the template itself. It's mainly the data that you build from it. And once you have multiple decisions, 10 decisions, 20 decisions, 50, you start to see which decisions are energizing you versus draining you, where your intuition is sharp, where it misleads you, what tools actually help or just feel like busy work. This is the compounding value, and you get more confident in your own process. And also, I have a little bit of a guide in there, but just some thoughts on how you can leverage AI with this data if you want to, in taking this data and giving you some insights on that as well. Having a decision operating system or DecisionOS isn't about getting it right. It's really building a way of deciding that feels honest and aligned. So again, the 5 phases: clarify, architect, validate, activate, integrate, give you something repeatable that you can carry into every chapter of life. I'll definitely go deeper in the accompanying newsletter with all the details so you don't feel like you need to take notes here, and a couple template walkthroughs so you can try this immediately. If you want the Decision OS template, make sure to check the show notes or leave the rating or review, and I'll share that template with you. So thank you so much for being here. Let's go ahead and keep building a life and work system that reflects who you're becoming, decision by decision.